This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
Kia ora, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. This episode we're going to be talking about, well, I don't know if I've mentioned this before on the show, but I am a bit of a reality TV show fiend. Like, I can't lie, to go feral for it. Yes, I'm here for like the light-hearted reasons, but there is always something to unpack, and I think I love that more than actually watching the show itself. And one show that I've been thinking a lot about recently is Love Island. And you know what, actually every summer I tell myself, or winter for us, I'm not going to watch it. And for the past couple of years I actually have followed that through, but somehow with this season I have been watching it and just really unpacking everything, and so that's what today's episode is all going to be about, my unpacking and musings on Love Island, inspired by the most recent season. And one thing that I want to talk about is just kind of put a caveat out there, is I'm just talking about the edited bits that make it onto the final cut. I do not know these people, don't expect them to be perfect people, but I think this season, well, there's something that we've been knowing, but this season really showed, who gets grace and, who gets kind of the villain edit for the exact same behavior. So, and you can still tune into this episode even if you haven't watched this season of Love Island, or if you've never watched Love Island before. I am going to break things down as we go. And actually, real quick, it's just dawned on me that maybe some of y'all are tuning in and don't even know what Love Island is. It's basically just where, like, people who are, like, hella good looking go onto this island and they're all just, like, dating each other in hopes to find, love. And there's like a series of challenges, and there's always a bit of drama going down. I think in the earlier seasons, because I think the first season came out 11 years ago, like circa 2015, 2016. And they were it felt more just like real people. But as the seasons have gone on, it definitely does seem more about getting exposure to be on Love Island, not it really being about love. So, yeah, that's a little disclaimer on just a little breakdown on what Love Island is. But one thing I want to say before heading into this episode is, I actually don't know these people. I want to make that very clear. I know that what I'm talking about is based on the edited bits that we do see. Another thing that I really want to say is that, no one in this episode is getting a halo. I'm not saying that, we're thinking in black and white and these people are straight villains or straight angels. I think there's a lot of, like, it's like in real life, it's not as black and white. And I think that's the thing about reality TV as well. It doesn't really allow for saints. Everyone in the villa is doing something a little bit messy, but that's just how it is. It's a pressure cooker. So I think the whole point of this episode is not to ask, was he or she, or they perfect? The question is, what happens when certain people are given grace and certain people are not? And the gap between those two different answers, that is the politics behind it all. And that's what we're going to focus on. That's what we're going to focus on for this episode. And I think, you might be sitting there thinking, well, why should we even talk about the politics behind Love Island? Like, it's a reality TV dating show. Like, is it really that deep. But if you think about it, it's a show that is filtered through producers and editors and also us. I can't forget us in the equation. You know, people do hop onto Twitter and Reddit and, you know, kind of collectively decide, you know, a person's character, who's likable and who isn't. Because Love Island isn't just about filming people and showing you what's happened. It's every night producers are choosing from literally hundreds of hours of footage. They decide what storyline you follow. They decide what soundbite plays under someone's face, who gets a dramatic sting, who gets the laugh, who gets cut entirely. And so every single edit is kind of like presenting a filtered version of who that person is, and we vote and talk and discuss based on that. So it's not that this is neutral, you know, it's been shaped into a story before it gets presented to us and before we watch it. And so I think, you know, we need to talk about that. It's not this organic reaction, right? And it's something that, you know, people have been picking up on. So Ofcom, which is the UK's media regulator, has said that Love Island has been the single most complained about program on British television multiple years running. And the most recent series alone pulled in over 14,000 complaints. You know, I think which tells you a couple of things. One, people are deeply invested emotionally in what happens to these contestants. And two, when something in that villa touches a nerve, you know, it's not like the audience silently takes that. And so today I'm going to be talking about two particular contestants, Jasmine and Simba. And I think but it's a pattern that's been going back for years. So, you know, this is not to say this corridor is this season was bad conversation. It's more about, you know, this is what the format has consistently done to contestants of colour since it started casting them conversation. And I think it's really important to be really precise about language, because words have meaning and impact. And, you know, contestants of colour is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and it shouldn't, because Jasmine's experience this season as a South Asian woman is not the same experience as Simba's as a black man. And it's not the same as what black women specifically have gone through on the show either. So I'm going to try my best to keep this distinct, because, you know, kind of collapsing it into a generic people of colour POC treatment story, I think it does erase the specific shape and nuance of each kind of bias that it takes. And another disclaimer that I want to put out there about, you know, why are you getting that deep about Love Island, is that, well, it's kind of in the title, Love Island, love. And I think when it comes to dating and our romantic lives, it's probably the area that we question the least when it comes to the politics behind it. Because for example, who your dating preferences are, who you find desirable or not, it's probably the one area of our lives where it comes across the most organic, but actually it is very much influenced by the systems that we live in, and it does conform a lot to when you think about like the politics of desirability and the politics behind beauty standards and the politics behind fetishes, racial fetishes, you know, it's not as organic as it seems. But when it comes to love and the matters of the heart, it seems like it's all organic and coming from this true, genuine place, which I'm not saying that it's not, but it's just, the one area of our lives that I think, find it really hard to draw that bridge between our preferences and how that's been shaped by the system. So you know what? It really is that deep, okay? So I really want to start off by talking about Jasmine. Jasmine, our girl Jasmine, regardless of whether you like her or not, because I've seen a lot of noise online and it seems like she's a very polarizing person. But regardless of what you think about her, homegirl has aura, okay? She is definitely one of the standout people from this season, and I just know that she is going to have a stellar career after this. Mad aura. But anyways, I think of Jasmine and the whole double standard thing a lot because how she got treated, I think it says a lot about how we still handle confident women who are not white. And I think one of the most there were many iconic moments, but something that really stands out is what happened after Casa Amor. And Casa Amor, is where the original islanders and a new batch of bombshells are separated into two villas to test loyalty. And so the whole point is will you have your head turned, or will you come back to pair up with your original partner? And Jasmine's partner at the time, Kevin, came back from Casa Amor after having connected with another person, Charlene, and Jasmine confronted him about it. And I don't even think, confronted is the right word. I mean, she was direct and she pushed back and she didn't let it slide. And, if you think about it, that's what you'd want anyone to do if someone had kind of strung them along. But this is where I think it gets interesting. One of the male islanders, Aiden, who is Kevin's brother, which I think is just interesting, described her reaction as off-putting. And he said he wouldn't want to date someone who behaved like that. Off-putting. And I think that's a very interesting word choice there, because it's doing something really specific. It's not, it's not that she was wrong, because it's not even really about what she said. It was more about the effect that she had on people around her. And she made people uncomfortable, but that discomfort itself became the crime. And, it wasn't an isolated comment. And it kind of became a whole conversation, the way that Jasmine's confidence was responded to. British Vogue ran an opinion piece about it, written by Issy Brunner. I really hope I said that correctly, with the headline, kind of basically making the point that watching confident brown girls get publicly torn apart is exhausting. And, Brunner made a good point in the article that even though Love Island's casting has gotten more diverse over the years, women of colour still held a completely different standard than white contestants. And, that piece made a really specific comparison. It kind of brought up other islanders in this season, also in previous years, who displayed the exact same, kind of loud or assertive, stand your ground energy and were celebrated for it. They were praised as strong and iconic. And so, when a white woman holds her ground, she's strong. But when Jasmine does the same thing, she's got an attitude. And, I think, especially since that article, viewers started pulling up the receipts themselves, and kind of connecting the dots themselves, and people were really pointing out to this pattern that a South Asian woman's confidence and confrontation on the show consistently gets relabeled as aggression. Well, the same behavior from white contestants gets filed under She Knows Her Worth. And I think there was one video that really stuck out with me, and it was Jasmine was being punished for refusing to play small. And, because playing small is not really about volume or confrontation at all. It's about the role that women are expected to occupy, take up a little less space, absorb a little more, perform a little more gratitude for whatever attention you're getting. And the women who refuse that role get read as the problem, regardless of what they're actually saying. And I want to be, again, very clear here. Jasmine is not a perfect contestant. She said some things in the villa that were sharp. She definitely hurt some people. She did do some things that were definitely a little bit shady. And I'm not saying that didn't happen and to pretend otherwise. But honestly, the show does not really produce anyone who's fair all the time. And I think that's exactly what a pressure cooker dating format does to people. And so, again, the question was never, is Jasmine flawless? The question is, put an equally flawed white contestant in the exact same scenario, same confrontation, same tone, same words. Does the show and the audience reach for the same word? Off-putting? And yeah, it's just really, really interesting. There's a cultural theorist named Stuart Hall, Jamaican-born, spent most of his career in Britain, and is basically one of the founding figures of media and cultural studies as a discipline. And he wrote this amazing essay called The Spectacle of the Other. And the core idea is pretty simple once you kind of take away the academic language of it all, because we know that academic language, Lord, I think it makes you work to get to understand the point. But anyways, stereotyping in Hall's definition is when you take a person and flatten them down to a small handful of traits and then treat those traits as if they're fixed, natural, just, who that kind of person is. Now, not something that they're doing in the moment, something they are permanently. And crucially, Hall's point is that this doesn't happen randomly. It happens specifically in situations where there's a power imbalance, where one group has been set up as the normal default category and everyone else gets defined in relation to that default as the different one, the other one, the other with the capital O. So when a white contestant is direct, that behavior gets read against a backdrop where she's already the default. So nothing about, them needs explaining. Her directness is just a personality trait, one of many. But when a South Asian contestant is direct, it's not read as one trait among many. It gets folded into a whole pre-existing script about what a fiery, dramatic brown woman is supposed to be. It's not, oh, Jasmine is being direct today. It's, oh, of course she's like that. And that's the flattening Hall's talking about. One version of the behavior gets to stay a moment. The other version becomes a character trait and eventually a caricature. Oh my gosh. Let's just move on from that word. And, it's worth naming it because it's not new to reality TV. It's not even new to Britain. It's not new at all. It's a story that's been told. A woman of color being coded as either overly submissive or overly aggressive, with almost no room in between, has shown up in colonial writing and film and advertising for well over a century. So it's not that Love Island has invented this. It's just a new place that it's showing up. Which I think is really interesting to know, right? Because it takes the pressure off us as an individual viewer, that feeling like we personally invented a prejudiced reaction. And it's not like we invented it, but we have definitely inherited a script. And the show is really good at cueing us to run this script. And, I'm not here to say that we are bad people, but I think recognizing that script is the first step in not running that script on autopilot. And I think there's another layer to the reaction to Jasmine that I want to make sure it doesn't get flattened, because this is not just about gender, and it's not really a race story as well. It's specifically about how South Asian women and brown women more broadly get coded, which is slightly different bias pattern than the one black women face on this show. It's definitely related, and there are definitely parts where it overlaps, but it's not identical. And there's a term for, why it's different. And that is colorism, which is different from racism, though obviously related to it and impossible to fully separate. But racism is discrimination based on someone's racial or ethnic category as a whole. But colorism is discrimination based on skin tone, and it operates within racial and ethnic groups, not just between them. And there's a sociologist, Margaret Hunter, who's done a lot of foundational research on this. And her work shows with actual data that lighter skinned people of color consistently get advantages that darker skinned people of color don't, whether it's in income or education outcomes, and who gets perceived as more marriageable, and who gets cast as attractive in media in the first place. And Hunter's research also found something that seems contradictory at first. Darker skinned people often get treated as more authentically, whatever their ethnicity is, more real, more culturally legitimate, while simultaneously being ranked lower on desirability. And so it's this weird, strange, and bizarre double bind, because it's praised for authenticity but penalized for it in the same breath. And on a dating show, this gets shaked out in a really specific way, because whose type on paper gets said out loud without hesitation. Whose confidence gets read as charming? Whose confidence gets read as a problem to be managed? And, we'll come back to colorism specifically when we talk about Black women's history on Love Island, but the data there is saying a lot. The reaction to Jasmine isn't happening in isolation. It's kind of sitting on top of an older set of assumptions about which women are allowed to take up space without being punished for it. The goal is not to cancel anyone who's found Jasmine's confrontation annoying. Plenty of people can kind of watch that scene and just genuinely not vibe with her delivery. And that's all good. I'm not saying that that's automatic bias. And so this is not a test of your individual reaction, but the test is the pattern. Does off-putting get reached for consistently for one kind of woman and not another for the same behavior? That's not a vibes question. That is a data question, It's a pattern that is very visible. So the next person that I want to talk about is Simba from this season. And I think, it's about what happens in the show controls the information itself and not just the reaction to it, compared to Jasmine, where it was more about the reaction to her behavior. And this is an editing story more than anything. And so let's set it up. Simba was one of the messier contestants on the series. Let's not forget the quick temper at some points, his reaction to when Mika rejected his offer to go to the hideaway. That was weird, okay? The way that he just played about with our girl Angie, it wasn't cool. So again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that he was flawless either. But one thing that I do think is interesting is what came out after he left the villa. The interviews he did once he was actually free to talk without a producer shaping the narrative. And the first thing is the finale outfit. So if you remember the finale, you'll remember that Simba was wearing bedazzled denim shorts, aka jorts, For the finale, which is the biggest night of the show, when the other finalists, the other men were wearing like tailored suits and silk shirts, and it became a whole ass meme. We were dragging Simba through the mud with that. People joked about it for days. And afterward, it wasn't until Simba and Angie did an interview with Capital Extra where Simba explained, it wasn't a style choice that he made. The stylist simply did not give him other options. Because, he'd spend most of the show in various pairs of shorts. So for the final, the producers thought it was a really good idea to offer him bedazzled jorts, which is insane. And Angelista spoke up too. She was like, no, he wasn't even given a suit as an option. And people mocked him big time, like people were saying he was really underdressed and he didn't take the moment seriously. But in reality, he just didn't have a choice in the matter. So that's not a personality flaw that audience was reacting to. That's a wardrobe department decision the audience mistook for a personality flaw, and that small detail makes a much bigger point. It's the audience thinks it's reacting to who someone is, but really it's reacting to a set of choices made entirely off camera by people whose job it is to shape what you see. And I think the second thing, and this is a whole lot heavier than just a wardrobe outfits. And during the series, Simba gave an emotional speech to Angelista at the fire pit. This was him just like bearing his soul after all the shenanigans he really dragged Angelista through. But he was talking about his mum, and he said something about like his mum was smiling bears, like BARES, about their relationship. And it got clipped, and then it just kind of became this meme, this joke of like smiling bears. But it wasn't, and it was only until after he left the villa that, he came out and said his mum's living with a motor neuron disease and he is his mum's carer, and that was her communicating her, like, I don't know, excitement and support for the relationship. So, if you think about it, it just adds so much context to the entire moment, and it does feel a little bit, I don't know, mean and sad that it was kind of turned into this meme joke, because we have Simba on national television talking as directly as he probably felt he could about watching his mum's health decline and hoping she'd get to feel joy about his life. And the show did not give viewers any of that context. So, it just handed you the clip, stripped of the thing that would have made all of us understand. And so, maybe we would have been tearing up at that point with him, but instead we were all laughing at him. And again, that's a pattern. And again, I'm not saying that he's perfect, but that careful editing where we were stripped of that humanizing context and all we saw was like Simba kind of losing his temper and getting shown his worst moments, while the vulnerability, the caretaking, the actual full picture of who he is got left behind. And one widely shared comment on the tab's coverage put it plainly, that there was no deep dive into him caring for his mum, and it left him looking like one of the villains of the whole series. And, people started doing the comparison work in real time too, pointing out other male islanders had done objectively more damaging things across the series, whether it was leading multiple women on, being dishonest for weeks at a time, treating people's feelings as a game. And those contestants were not edited into the villainous edit that Simba got. Yeah, just very interesting. Very, very interesting. So yeah, two different two different contestants. I think with Jasmine, it was more about how the audience interpreted footage that did air, and with Simba, it was a lot about what never made it to air at all. And I think this pattern is it's not by accident, right? If we go back to Stuart Hall and his stereotyping framework, it's not just about how a moment gets read, but how a whole person gets built out of selected fragments for us before, we even see them. And so think about what character means on a reality show. It's not the whole person. It's a highlight reel that a team of editors has decided represents that person, and the choices about which highlights make the cut, are never neutral. They're shaped by what the editors think will be, compelling television, which very often means, who can we cast as the villain this week? Because villains are entertaining. Villains get complaints get press get viewers. And there's also a historian worth kind of bringing into this corridor, Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who wrote a whole study on how black men specifically have been coded as dangerous or threatening across American media and public life going back over a century, often through the, selective presentation of statistics and stories that are emphasized conflict and left out context. So obviously his research wasn't about Love Island, it's about crime reporting and policy history, but the underlying mechanism he describes is pretty similar. So take real behavior, strip out the humanizing context, present only the part that gets read that reads as aggression or threat. And once you've manufactured a type of person that didn't actually exist in real life, that's generally the same move as a bad villain edit. And it's not lying exactly, because the temper flare-ups that Simba had were real. They happened, unfortunately. But truth by omission is still a kind of distortion. You can build an entirely false impression out of entirely true footage just by choosing what surrounds it. And, here's the thing that makes it worse rather than better. Simba wasn't edited as some, mustache twirling cartoon villain. He was edited as a specific kind of stock character, quick-tempered, a bit much, someone whose emotional intensity reads as a threat to the vibe rather than a person having a hard time. And that specific too much, too aggressive, needs managing read, especially for black men, has an extremely long cultural history behind it. And it's not neutral which flavor of villain a black male contestant gets cast as. So when people say, he wasn't edited fairly, what they're often reaching for without necessarily having the vocabulary is the show just didn't fail to flatter him. It slotted him into a pre-existing racially loaded template of what an aggressive man looks like, and then let the audience's preloaded assumptions do the rest of the work. Now, same caveat as before, Simba was not a perfect contestant. He said things and did things across the series that just generally upset people, especially our girl Angelista. And that's real. I'm not erasing that. But again, the question isn't, was he perfect? The question is, when other islanders did things that were, by most measures, more hurtful, sustained dishonesty, actively juggling multiple people's feelings for weeks, did they get the villain scoring, the villain music, the villain framing, or did the show and the audience, us, extend them the benefit of the doubt that, Simba never got? And once you know his mum's diagnosis, once you know the wardrobe story, you start to wonder how many other islanders of color have entire chunks of context missing from their storylines that we, the audience, will simply never find out about because they didn't happen to sit down for an interview afterwards. And I think, I don't know, when you kind of think about it a little too long, it is a little bit unsettling. But I think let's kind of widen the lens now, because Jasmine and Simba are this year's examples of a pattern that's been documented contestant after contestant for basically the entire run of the show. 2018, Samira Mighty was the first black woman cast on the UK version. And before she even entered the villa, her promotional package was noticeably different from the other women's. The other female contestants' intro videos talked about romance and past relationships, what they were looking for. Samira's leaned hard into the sassy, high-energy persona with barely any of that romantic framing at all. Which lines up with a stereotype that's been documented for decades. It's sometimes called the sapphire caricature. Yes, I got there. It goes back to old radio and television representations of black women as loud, aggressive, and quick to anger. And there's research. A scholar named Applewhite has written about this, describing the modern sassy black best friend trope, basically a repackaged, softened hybrid of that old sapphire stereotype and the equally old mammy stereotype, the self-sacrificing caretaker who exists to support everyone else's storyline but her own. So before Samira even had said a single word in that villa, the show had already decided which stock character she was going to be. Then we have 2019, Yewande Biala, dark-skinned black woman, honestly such a baddie, scientist from Dublin. And she talked openly afterward about knowing, literally standing in the coupling lineup day one, that she wasn't going to be picked because none of the men's stated types ever seemed to include someone who looked like her. And she told BBC Newsbeat afterwards that being black in the media means you have to be, in her words, 10 times better than everyone else just to be seen as enough. And after leaving the villa, she got messages from people telling her she was too dark, as if that were an insult rather than just a description. And she also spoke about a specific incident where a fellow contestant appeared to deliberately mix up her name with another black woman's. And other islanders later admitted they knew it was wrong in the moment but didn't say anything at the time. And then we have 2021, Kaz Kamwi, similar story. 2022, India Pollack, her Casa Amor storyline, where her partner Dami pursued someone else while they were separated, became a massive plot point. And the way the public reacted to her afterwards, even after they reconciled, carried real weight for how the show ultimately played out. Then we have 2023, Whitney Adebayo. There was a compilation of clips of her repeatedly getting talked over or cut off mid-sentence in group conversations. And also around that time, a former contestant named Rachel Finney gave an interview to Gracia, laying out something producers apparently do on a structural level: cast exactly one black woman and one black man into the original lineup almost every season, sometimes adding a few more mixed race contestants later as bombshells. And her point wasn't just that this feels tokenistic, it's that it actively teaches the audience season after season that there's a hard ceiling on how many black contestants belong in the villa. One, maybe two, but no more. In 2024, fans flagged that there was only one black woman in that year's original cast. And that was pushed back on. In 2025, a contestant named Alima Gagijo, sorry if I said that incorrectly, choosing to couple up with a white contestant named Blue Chegany, I also hope I said that correctly, was told to his face on camera, "I'll be honest, on paper, you're not my type." And again, maybe just generally they were not their type, but it really does slot into this, into a pattern, which is really interesting. And And also, another thing that I think is really interesting, it took 11 series of the show before a darker complexioned black woman was ever crowned the winner. 11. I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's just how the cards fell. 11 seasons in a row is a pattern with a cause. And I think it's, really interesting. And there's a term for this, actually. The term is misogyny. It was coined in 2008 by a scholar named Moya Bailey. She was a graduate student at the time doing research into how black women were depicted in old medical school textbooks and yearbooks, and noticed the exact same negative stereotypes showing up, basically unchanged 100 years later in contemporary pop culture. It's a blend of the word misogyny and the French word for black, noir. I think that's how you say it. I'm not too sure. And the definition Bailey herself gives is that it describes a specific compounded hatred directed at black women that comes from anti-black racism and sexism operating together at the same time in the same moment, not as two separate things that you can pull apart. It's not racism plus sexism. It's a distinct thing that happens at the intersection. The welcome to the villa, but you're not anyone's type on paper experience isn't the same as racism, and it's not quite the same as sexism. It's its own specific flavor of bias, unfortunately. The word misogyny, it was added to the dictionary in 2023. It is intersectionality, right? And it's, it's the compounding effect of intersectionality. It's not even compounding per se. It's like interaction of those two things. It's Samira gets cast as sassy before she's even spoken. It's Yewande gets structurally excluded from being anyone's type while simultaneously being told that she's too dark. It's Alima getting rejected to her face on camera. It's so many things that's happening. And so, this is why representation is important. It's about getting black and brown faces cast on the show. And not that that's nothing, it does matter, and it's improvement on where the show started. But representation on its own isn't the finish line, because casting someone doesn't automatically get them the same grace, the same benefit of the doubt, the same humanizing edit, the same, they're just being themselves past that white contestants get by default. Being counted is not the same as being seen. And you can put someone in the frame and still refuse to actually look at them. And, that's what I've been trying to say. Now, what I would love to get into, because this is another thing that kept coming up on Love Island this year, which was, the politics of a girl's girl. Girl's girl. Even if you watch 5 minutes of this particular series, you would just hear it all the time. Someone's a girl's girl, someone's not a girl's girl, someone's proving that they're a girl's girl, someone's being exposed as never being a girl's girl in the first place. It's kind of become like the unofficial moral currency. And it's less of a description than a verdict. And what I want to just kind of talk about today is, well, what does that phrase mean? Why does it get applied so unevenly? So just real quick, where does it come from? Basically, a girl's girl is a woman who generally prioritizes and supports other women, as opposed to treating female friendship as disposable or, secondary to romantic pursuits. And it's really become a big thing on TikTok. And I think it's in response of another phrase that has become deeply unpopular, which is, I'm not like other girls, or, pick me girl. And and, not like other girls was like meant to be a flex, right? Like the idea that you're different from typical femininity, like you don't like makeup or gossip, you're just like the guys and it makes you superior to other women. And, we kind of collectively said, we are dropping that because we don't want to put other women down. So I think, the girl's girl kind of rose up as a corrective. And, the idea that real feminism or real solidarity is like actively rooting for other women. And I think, the rise of popularity of a girl's girl has really come from that. And I'm not critiquing that, but what I'm critiquing is that what happens to a phrase when it becomes a badge, you can win or lose based on a single moment, often without much context, which is, really interesting. Which is really, really interesting. And there was a specific moment. There's a challenge on Love Island called It's Not That Deep, where islanders had to guess which of their castmates matched a series of secrets out loud. And the fallout from that challenge turned into a full-blown gender standoff. The boys accused the girls of hypocrisy, calling it a double standard and how everyone's revealed secrets are being judged. And in the middle of that, Priya, who'd come under fire for one of her own revealed secrets, tried to speak up and defend herself and was told by the boys more or less to, calm down, like chill out. Classic. And separately, in the same stretch of episodes, Jasmine made a comment that a male contestant's admission to having a wandering eye in relationships wasn't really that bad as long as he never acted on it. And that triggered a huge reaction from the boys who felt that was hypocritical of her, given she'd also criticised another male contestant, Lorenzo, pretty sharply for barely remembering the names of women he'd slept with. And I think this is where it generally gets tangled. And I want to be honest about the tangle rather than pretend that it's simple. Was Jasmine actually being inconsistent there? I don't know, maybe. There's a fair critique on its own terms. But it was interesting what happens next. Jasmine said a contradictory thing and it gets folded into a bigger pre-existing, she's difficult, she's not a real girl's girl, she's all talk narrative that had been building around her because of the Kevin confrontation. And, meanwhile, and this is the actual double standard, male contestants who had done things that were, frankly far more damaging to other people's feelings weren't losing their status as one of the good ones over it. Their inconsistency got read at worst a bit of harmless messiness, but her inconsistency got read as proof of character. So a girl's girl status isn't actually being awarded based on consistent objective standard behavior. It's awarded based on how much an audience or the other islanders already likes you. And then it gets used after the fact to justify, that feeling, but it's dressed up as a moral judgment, which is really, really interesting. And I feel like this could be a whole episode in of its own. And I actually might leave this for another, part 2. We'll leave this for a part 2. But how I want to finish this episode is not to say that we shouldn't ever engage with reality TV at all. I don't think that's the case. But I think, is there things that we can do or questions we can ask ourselves that we can watch, more ethically or with a more critical lens? So here, I'm not here to say stop watching Love Island. But how do we watch this without being unconscious participants in the exact thing we just spent critiquing? And I think the first thing is separate your reaction to a person from your reaction to the edit. Like, every single time you feel a strong, oh, I did not like them reaction forming, ask yourself, am I reacting to something they actually said or did? Or am I reacting to how it was scored, framed, and sequenced by an editing team whose entire job is to manufacture that exact reaction in me? That doesn't mean to say that every strong reaction is manufactured or wrong. Some people just really do behave badly. Also, there are some people that you just don't vibe with, and that's fine. But I think it's good to give yourself a beat just to, ensure that you haven't dehumanized that person. You're not just automatically running on a script or running on stereotypes. Because I think that's how these patterns still keep existing, right? Is because we're all not questioning it enough and just running with these stories. I think another thing to do is, do the swap test. Literally in your head, if a contestant of a different race or a different gender did the exact same thing, said the exact same words in the exact same tone, would you still be this bothered? And if the honest answer is no, that gap is worth sitting with, not defending, just sitting with. Third, pay attention to who gets the benefit of the doubt by default and who has to earn it from scratch every single episode with no accumulated credit. And I think that pattern is usually more honest than any single storyline. Fourth, and I think this one's more about us in the show, be really careful about pile-ons. There's a difference between critique and a dog pile, and social media makes that line incredibly easy to cross, especially at scale, especially when a whole platform decides someone's the villain of the week. A fair critique of a specific action doesn't require flooding someone's actual real life inbox with hate. These are people, they go home after this. And I think the dog pile has just become this weird fever dream, especially since social media is more prominent in our lives. I mean, the dog pile and the fan wars have been next level, especially between Jasmine fans and Yulia fans and Lola fans, and it's actually insane. We all just need to calm down a little bit, I think. Fifth, support the people doing the work of naming this stuff, whether it's the writers, whether it's people breaking this down on social media, whether it's past contestants who keep showing up to interviews and telling the truth about what actually happened to them, even though it would honestly be so much more easier and personally and professionally to just stay quiet and protect their brand deals. And I think maybe the biggest one is hold representation and treatment as two separate report cards. Do not let a show off the hook for uneven treatment just because the cast looks diverse on paper, and don't dismiss the value of that diverse casting either just because the treatment still needs work. But both things can be true at the same time. The show can be doing better than it's used to and still be doing real harm right now. Progress is not binary and neither is critique. And that's really the whole episode in this sentence, really. If I just had to pick one line to leave y'all with, representation gets someone in the room. It does not by itself guarantee that they get the same grace, the same humanity, the same benefit of the doubt as everyone else already sitting there. And that second part, the grace part, that's a separate fight. It doesn't happen automatically just because casting has improved. Someone has to keep pushing for it. That somebody, hopefully us, the audience. But we have to keep pushing for it on purpose every single season. It's true of Love Island. It's true of The Bachelor. It's true of basically any reality TV show. So, have fun, but also let's just all keep it real. And I will see you for part 2 of this kōrero. We will be breaking down the girl's girl.
Thank you for tuning in into another episode of Headscarves and Good Yarns. To keep spinning the yarns, let us know your thoughts. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Headscarves and Good Yarns, or email us at headscarvesandgoodyarn@gmail.com.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.